about time to start. This means speak up, and this means move back farther. I'm not accustomed to this mic, so you'll have to show me what needs to be done. This evening, we're going to have a group discussion. That means that you talk also. I'm not here to talk all the time. We're going to talk about the government and Christians. And please, you've got sheets in front of you. Try not to get too far ahead of me on those scriptures, if you will. And we want to make this not a political evening. Don't want to get the politics involved, but we want to talk about the government, different types of government, and how it affects the Christians and the Christians' responsibility. Before we begin, let's have a word of prayer. Father, we thank you so much for all of the many things that we have, the many opportunities that we have. We're especially thankful that we can come together to worship, to praise you, and to study your word together. It's through Jesus we pray. Amen. It is said that Benjamin Franklin was a brilliant person to argue his point. In fact, at one of the congressional sessions, somebody brought up a proposal, and Benjamin Franklin made a tremendous defense against it, expressing his opinion very well. Afterward, they asked him, how could you come up with this on the spur of the moment? He said, I didn't. It's been laying on my desk for a year. He was well prepared in advance. That's the reason for my bringing this up this evening. I hope that we can look at this and gain something from it. We need to establish first the difference between different types of law. There's civil law. Civil law will reflect what the society considers civil. In our country, civil law would be what the people of the United States consider civil. In Iran, the civil law would be what the people in Iran consider to be civil. There's also military law. Military law is usually strong organization, strongly ruled by the authority on top. Frequently, we have civil law and military law combined. In this, our country, it's civil law with the authority over the military. Who's in charge of the military in this United States? The president is. Usually that's the way, and they usually work together to obtain a particular goal, peace, protection of the people. What happens when the military is in control? Can you think of any countries where we've had military take over from the civilian? James, if you don't speak up, I'm going to call on you. Have you heard of that, or do you think of any examples where that has happened? How about in the overthrow of the government in North Korea, Vietnam, Venezuela, other places? If you're familiar with the history, you had the French Revolution, where the people overthrew the government and the military also. But usually it's the military that works with the civilian government. I want to make sure everybody is clear now. What I'm saying is civil government is going to accept what the people consider to be civil as to what civil law will be. There are people in the United States that want to change civil law, and they want to do it in about 3 weeks by votes. We're going to talk about that later. You've got the moral law. Where does moral law come from?
God.
From God. If the people don't accept God, they will make their own gods, or they will make their own things to worship. For many people in our country, it is the climate change, it's the Mother Earth. Many of them have a cause, and that has become their religion. But you have God's law, a moral law, you have civil law, and the two can be together or they can be opposed to one another. You have a list with different scriptures that we're going to read this evening. Could I ask who has King James Version? Okay, and does anybody have anything else? Good, excellent. The New American Standard, the one that doesn't flow as well as the others, but probably has the best translation of all. I have both, and I have also the New English and the EVS. A few of these passages we may read from 2 or 3 different scriptures. Would someone that has Romans 13 and read verses 1 through 7, this will talk about the purpose and the authority of government. That's Romans 13, 1 through 7.
Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of God, powers that be are ordained of God. Whosoever therefore resisteth the power, resisteth the ordinance of God, and they will resist that resist shall receive themselves damnation. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to evil. Wilt thou then be afraid of the power? Not be afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and thou shalt have praise of the same. For he is the minister of God to thee for good. But if thou do that which is evil, be afraid. For he beareth not the sword in vain. For he is the minister of God, your avenger to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil. Wherefore you must needs be subject not only for wrath, but also for conscience sake. For this cause pay ye tribute also, for they are God's ministers, attending continually unto this very thing. Render therefore to all their duties, tribute to whom tribute is due, custom to whom customs, fear to whom fear, honor to whom honor. Verse 9.
Very good, thank you. Question: who originated government? Where does government come from? Your turn. Where does government come from?
God's ordinances.
Okay, from God. God has designed that there be government. Let me ask you, what type of government does he require? Trick question. He doesn't specify, does he? Doesn't specify what type of government at all. God's plan is that there be government, and what is government to do? I'll help you get started. To commend good work, to praise those that do well, to carry out justice, to punish the wrongdoer, to collect taxes, to maintain justice and protection. Somebody look up Ecclesiastes 8:11, if you will. This is just a bonus right here for you to think about. Ecclesiastes 8:11. Don't see any hands going up. Okay.
Because the sentence against an evil deed is not executed quickly, therefore the hearts of the sons of men among them are given fully to the devil, to do evil.
I want to read that from the New English. When a sentence is not executed at once against a crime, the human heart is encouraged to do evil. I wish people in our government would read that verse and practice it. What does that mean?
There's no penalty for a crime done that can have to be visibly realized or actually adhered to, and there's no reason to not commit the crime.
How many times do we have people that are out on probation for long periods of time committing more and more and more crimes? And if it's not dealt with quickly, just take a look at what's happening in Seattle, in the other countries, in Portland, places where they're having rioting. It was not dealt with quickly, and it just continues to get worse and worse and worse. I'm not saying that the government wants to stop it there, but that's an example of what happens when it isn't contained. Luke 3:12 through 14. Would somebody read that, please?
Then tax collectors also came to be baptized, and said to him, Teacher, what should we do? And he said to them, Let no more than what is appointed for you. Likewise the soldiers asked him, saying, what shall we do? And he said to them, do not intimidate anyone or accuse falsely. Be content with your wages.
Honest dealing, fair taxes, no shakedowns. In this country, we have a series of events that affect our political system and our leaders. It's called lobbying. What do we call that in other countries? Bribery. Okay. Honest dealings, fair taxes, no shakedowns, dealing fairly. Now, what about the Christian's responsibility to government? If you will, 1 Peter 2, 13 through 17. And I'd like somebody with the King James to read this if they would.
Submit yourselves to every ordinance of man to the Lord's sake, whether it be to the king as supreme or to governors as unto them that are sent by him to punishment of evildoers and for the praise of them that do well. For so this is the will of God. For so is the will of God, that with well doing ye may put to silence the ignorance of foolish men, as free, not as using your liberty for a cloak of maliciousness, but as servants of God. Honor all men, love the brotherhood, fear God, and honor the king.
Who are you to honor?
Honor all men, love the brotherhood, fear God, and honor the king. Verse 17.
How good does the king have to be?
That's the same.
Why would you honor somebody that might not be the best person?
Because if you look at it wrong, they might feel you did.
Those that hate Trump, why should you be showing him honor according to God's word? The position. That's right. I must admit that when a president was elected several years ago that I thought was a terrible, terrible person, I sometimes on social media shared some of the things that were attacking the individual. I repented of that. I'm sorry. That was a mistake. I still will voice my opinion on what people say, but I try not to do it against the person or the position anymore. You agree? Disagree?
I agree.
Agree?
But, yeah, I guess general criticism is, I think, well and decent and that thing. I mean, I don't think anyone should be, I guess, not able to receive criticism. But I mean, thankfully, we have that legal right here in this country.
Does that apply to the local mayor? The governor? The
Position of power.
position of power and authority. Okay, keep that in mind now. Okay. Titus chapter 3, verses 1 and 2.
Remind them to be subject to rulers and authorities, to obey, to be ready for every good work, to speak evil of no one, to be peaceable, gentle, showing all humility to all men.
There are a lot of statements in there, a lot of meanings. What does it mean? Obedient to authorities. If the state police pulls you over for speeding, how are you supposed to treat them? And you weren't speeding, how are you supposed to treat them? With respect. With respect. Sometimes hard to do, but that's what's expected. Be respectful. I have heard many in the Black community that had their lawyers and their representatives talk to them, and they always said, if you're confronted by an authority, don't cause trouble, shut up and do what they tell you. If they mistreat you, we'll take care of it later in court, but don't not show the respect that you should. If you react negatively, how are they going to react to you? We probably have an example of that at Wolf City. I don't know all the details, but from what little has been said, that probably is involved in that right there. Ready for every good work. How can you be ready for every good work? Obviously prepared. How else? How about opening your eyes and looking for good things to do? Do not slander. Be peaceable, gentle, show courtesy. Does that mean you show courtesy to that rotten senator that lies all the time on television? Yeah, this is yes, no matter how much you want to. The position deserves respect. Government is ordained of God. Matthew 22, 15 through 22, we're not going to read it. We covered this in class a couple of weeks ago. It's the render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's and render to God that are things that are God's. Civil authority, God's authority. You have the moral law of God and you have the government. The things that are due government, the taxes, the fines, whatever it is that's due government, that's to go to them. The clear separation of the federal government and the moral law. Timothy 2, 1 through 4. First Timothy 2, 1 through 4.
I exhort, therefore, that first of all, supplications, prayers, intercessions, and the giving of thanks be made for all men, for kings are made for all that are in authority, that they may lead a quiet, peaceable life in all godliness and honesty. For this is good and acceptable in the sight of God our Savior, who will have all men be saved and come to the knowledge of the truth.
I'm going to read it from the New English translation also. First of all, then, I urge that all requests, prayers, intercessions, and thanks be offered on behalf of all people, even for kings and all who are in authority, that we may lead peaceful and quiet life in all godliness and dignity. And if that doesn't happen, now I want you to really put on your thoughts. There are different plans in the United States as to what people want to have happen at the time of the election and afterwards, regardless of how it goes. There's going to be unrest. There's going to be violence in some areas. I don't know how extensive it's going to be. How is the reaction of Christians going to be? You have to answer that for yourself. We've read the scriptures. You're to be peaceful. Christianity is not advanced through violence. Never intended to be a violent way of spreading the gospel. Islam, yes, it was, but Christianity never designed for violent changes. I leave it up to you to answer that question as to how you will handle things if we have problems. Acts 5:29, Acts 5, verse 29, famous with Peter's quote when he said, "We must obey God rather than man." Okay, if the apostles were to, it's hard not to move around and talk to you close up. If it was the apostles that were saying this, we must obey God rather than man. What are the exceptions? Who's the exception? Are there exceptions to that principle? Okay, my basic premise, if you remember, I said, you've got civil law. Civil law will reflect what is civil in the society. What if civil law and the society are contrary to God's law? What do you do? I don't want to make this political, but let's be downright honest and plain with it. Antifa. Antifa, before they started using the name now, was the Communist Party. In the United States, the history of it, it was gaining and becoming very strong prior to the Second World War. And then when people in the United States saw what happened in Russia, in China, in other places when the communists took over, the Communist Party was of no interest and basically faded away to almost no importance at all. It has come back. Antifa is the Communist Party led by people that want communism. Black Lives Matter is for the benefit of Marxist society and a change. They're using the racial unrest and stirring that up. Basically, for communism to be effective, there always has to be somebody that they're against. There's somebody that's bad, that's terrible. There has to be an enemy to deal with. There is plans for problems. I urge everybody to be careful and to use good common sense. Different types of governments. You have a chart. A republic, a representative republic, the United States, where you have people that are elected to represent you. You have other types. You have the monarchy, like a royal family, a dictator. You have socialism. By the way, Hitler was a democratic socialist. When I hear some of our politicians say, oh, I'm fine, I'm a democratic socialist, that's Hitler talking. Okay. Socialism, trying to come up with a good explanation, a good definition of it. It's so hard to do. It just very, very difficult because it has different meanings and it's portrayed different ways. Best I could come up with was socialism is a theory or system of social organization that advocates the ownership and control of the means of production and distribution, capital, land, etc., for the benefit of the community as a whole, usually through a centralized government. It's the opposite of capitalism. Now, when you get into discussions with people, you need to keep a couple of things in mind. When we talk about capitalism in the United States, we do not have a true form. We were originally in the framers of the Constitution, theirs was a free agent, a free democracy without the government intervening. Basically, you could do what you wanted to do in business without being restricted. Over the year, laws are passed, regulations are coming about. We do not have a true capitalist system, but we do have a system that works most of the time. You will have people complaining about capitalism, and you need to get them to explain what they're talking about. Yeah. By the way, to give an example of what I'm talking about, you will hear some of our politicians talk about Sweden being the perfect example of a socialist nation. Sweden is not a socialist nation. It's a country that has a national health network. It is more capitalistic than the United States. They have fewer regulations than we do here. So, if you can frame the wording that's used in a discussion, you can win the argument usually. So be careful with the terminology that you're using. Socialism would be the opposite of capitalism. In socialism, the greater good replaces the individual. Get that? I want to make sure everybody understands. Under socialism, the greater good is more important than the individual. The majority is what's important. God is always replaced in a socialist nation. Why would you think that would be?
Well, the greater good is defined by men.
Defined by men, okay. And in a socialist country, where is the authority? The government. The government makes all decisions. The government decides what land you live on, where you work, what you do, how much you make, supposedly equal with everybody, but the government becomes the total authority. And to a Christian, where is the authority? God. Should be with God. Margaret Thatcher said, socialism is nice until the money runs out. Socialism has never worked for any length of time You remember the United Socialist Republic of Russia collapsed within itself, and it wasn't but just a few decades that happened. A socialist nation will run out of money and it collapses on itself. When that happens, it usually turns to a stricter, more rigid form of government, and that's usually communism. And you know what happens when communism fails? It goes back to a dictatorship, to a person or a few people that can promise everything and take complete control through military. Let me bring one other thing up to you that I think would be interesting. In researching this, I checked on China. Now, China is a communist country. The Chinese country is not run by the government. It is run by the communists. They have gone more toward a capitalist type system. It's a modified system, but you can have your own company. You can expand, but guess who's there in your company telling you, yes, you can do this, or no, you're not permitted to? A member of the Communist Party. It's the Communist Party that runs China. And what are they trying to do about religion? Have you heard on the news? They're trying to eliminate all religion, hundreds of thousands of people. They're destroying all the churches now, trying to completely rid religion, particularly Christian. And when I say Christianity, I mean people that believe in God, believe in Jesus. That doesn't necessarily mean they're always worshiping as we would consider correct. But Christians, they're trying to eliminate Christians. They eliminate the growth rate. How? Forced abortion. For a while, you could have one child. I think it's up to 2 now, if I'm not mistaken, as long as one's a boy. Okay. There's always a group to be blamed. In Rome, when Rome was having a lot of serious problems, who did they blame? During the time of the apostles and then for the next few hundred years? The Jews and the Christians. It became so bad that with many of the cities that you read about, Philippi and others, that the Christians could no longer live in the city. They would live outside, usually in what we would consider a commune or a group together for some protection. But do you realize that when they went to get food, they couldn't go into the city unless they paid tribute to Caesar? They couldn't go to the marketplace unless you paid tribute to Caesar as God. You couldn't go to court for anything that happened to you unless you acknowledged Caesar as God. Yet they thrived. Why? They were a very close-knit people living Christianity. And even though they were persecuted, they grew, and people saw that they had something very special. It was a slow growth at times, but they did grow, and Christianity did expand. Now, keep in mind that with socialism, communism, the ruling class is the one that decides, and they decide for the collective. If I have any Star Trek people in here, that word probably rang a bell right there. The collective, that's the majority. The majority rules. Whatever the majority wants, that's it. Whatever's best for the majority. What about the minority, the individual? Doesn't matter, or you get rid of it. By the way, socialism, communism are very big on regulating families and things of that nature. Abortion, well accepted, required in some areas. And what comes next after abortion? Euthanasia. Yeah. Why? When you're no longer protective and producing for the collective, you have no value to the collective. You had a comment?
I guess I looked up communism, and at least by the strictness of the definition, at least by definition, not as it actually exists in reality, but by the definition, it can't and doesn't, never has, and never will exist in the actual defined form, where everything belongs to everyone essentially. Yeah, it never does exist. It's a modified, like I think essentially what we're getting at, it's a modified form. So
Yes. That's exactly it. In socialism, the elite determine what is to go on and what is shared, and what's going on in Venezuela right now. If you live in the country and you farm, you're probably okay, you're eating. If you live in the city, you're fighting for all your food, and you're fighting your own soldiers. The socialism has totally collapsed, and the ruling class is wealthy as all can be, extremely wealthy. Communism usually results in equal poverty and less of incentive. Why would you not have incentive under a communist system? No, you're not getting any more than somebody else did. I heard it explained by a university professor. His class, it was a civics class, he was talking about socialism, and they objected to what he was saying, that they thought socialism was great. He said, fine, in this class, we will have the whole year devoted to the socialist system. Everybody will get the same grade at the end of the year. The first test, the ones that studied hard got A, and the slackers got Fs. You know what happened on the second test? The ones that studied didn't study as hard, and the ones that slacked off didn't study at all, and the grade went down. And pretty soon, by the third or fourth test, nobody cares. He failed the whole class as the example of what's wrong with a socialist way of thinking. I want to move on to another area. We have the election coming up, and I hope that you're aware of it with our educational system in the public schools. I don't know a lot about the ones here in Texas, so I'm not talking about any teachers or any school system here. Well, other than I can go to the Capitol and tell you a little bit about that. Our educational system being promoted by the National Education Association and Black Lives Matter and the homosexual community is introducing so much of that into the elementary schools in some areas. Afterwards, if you need examples, I can tell you what they're requiring the students to do in the third and the fourth grade, something that would not even be required of seniors. But they're saying that sex is natural and therefore the children should learn about it and learn about it the right way in elementary school. Here in Texas, the New York Times Project 1619 has been looked at by the Board of Education for Texas. And each time they're going to vote, there's a number of people that show up against it, and the vote is delayed. I went on the internet, I could not find out the current status of when it was to be voted on again. If you're not familiar with the New York Times Project 1619, rewrites all history. It bases it on the first slave ship coming into the country in 1619. And it says that all of our founders were evil people, and the only thing they wanted to do was to keep slavery down and persecute Black people. All of your people that wrote the Constitution they were very evil people. They had slaves. They never talk about who freed the slaves, but and you're due to recompense them. You reward them for their ancestry and all. It changes all of history, and it leads toward a socialist communist way of being, that all people should be equal. Are all people equal? Why not? God, he didn't intend for everybody to be equal. We're different. James, you're different from me. You have different ways of doing things than I do. Probably better in most areas. I'm one of the most understanding people you get. In an argument, I'm extremely good to pick out the good things and calm things down. What if I get mad? All that changes. We have different personality traits, different things. We're different. People are different. We need to keep that in mind. Islam is being taught in some of our schools, and it's not just taught what Islam is. In some of the schools, the children are required to learn the laws of Islam and to write out the statement that makes them an Islam, that Islam is God and I will follow Islam. Now, according to Islam law, that makes them an Islam for the future. But that's being taught in some schools I don't know about here whatsoever. I want to leave you with several thoughts here. It's been said, and I think it's something for us to think about. All that is needed for evil to succeed is for good people to do nothing. Now, we have votes coming up. I don't know a lot about the representatives. I don't know a lot about don't know anything much about the local people. But I would urge you to take advantage of the opportunity and look at what people stand for and use your opportunity to vote for what you believe is necessary. If we do nothing, I guarantee you, we will be seeing socialist things very near future, and it will be, if you've listened to any of what's been going on when they're talking and interviewing the candidate for the Supreme Court, that type of treatment will come to Christians. No doubt about it. Why? Because they have to eliminate the moral law for the government, for the collective to rule. You say that it's not going to happen. Have you looked at anything that's going on in New York City right now? The mayor de Blasio and the governor Cuomo are fighting back and forth. They're trying to push their way and be more successful themselves than any other way. I saw this evening that once again, Cuomo has said to the Jewish people, you do what I say or I'm going to close your synagogues and just do away with everything you're doing. De Blasio is taking the same stand. He's letting everything go in the communities that support him. But they're picking out a group of people. You remember? Socialist, communist, by the way, de Blasio is a communist. He's admitted that. They always have to have somebody that's causing the trouble, somebody to be against them, to stir up trouble. They have it in Chattanooga, Tennessee. I use Tennessee because I'm more familiar with what's happened recently. The mayor in Chattanooga is trying to control the worship. You can have 10 people, but they can't sing, they can't chant, and they can't talk. But you can have 10 people come. They tried that in Knoxville, and the next day, the mayor had gotten such a pushback that he changed it. He says, 50 people can come together, just don't get close together. In Houston, you had a sampling of this, I think it was 3 years ago, you would be more familiar than I am, where the mayor tried to arrest and control preachers that were preaching against homosexuality. Now, the courts stopped it, but it has happened in Texas. The Michigan governor, it's hard for me to say it, I'm from Michigan originally. The Michigan governor has said the courts have stopped me on this right here, so I'm going to use all other means, every other agency to do what I want to do. We have a lot of people in the government that are no longer following the laws. They're doing what they want to do. In Virginia, the law was just passed a few months ago. How many people have their own business here? Anybody? How many of you work for a large corporation? Okay. The law in Virginia was signed into law by the governor just a couple of months ago. It requires that every business of a certain size must hire a certain number of racial minorities, must hire a certain number of LGBT people. Any corporation of a certain size that has a board must have on their board LGBT people and must have minorities representing the workers. Some of our states are going that direction. Some progressives are already promoting the idea that God needs to be removed. If you just listen to the talk of some of the people behind a lot of these passions, you'll see that coming about very much. I'm going to leave you with one other thought. Passions cannot be met without law. Why do you have laws? Why do you have moral laws? To restrain evil doing, to restrain keeping within what's right. A question that I have, and I'll have to deal with it myself, and I'm not advocating at you because I don't have it clearly filled in my mind. A government in the United States, is the government the Constitution, the law that we have, or is it the leaders that ignore the Constitution, which is the government. I see some eyebrows raised. I think we're coming to that situation that decision will have to be made. And I don't have the answer myself at this point, but I want you to think about that. I urge you to think about what it would be like under a government of socialists, communists, and then look at those verses that we read first today. Honor the king, show respect. That's still a commandment, no matter what the type of government. We're not to be a violent type of people, but we're to be honorable. We're to show respect and courtesy to our officials. Doesn't mean that we do everything that they say. God's law takes priority. I thank you very much. There's a handout that I left in back. I didn't bring it in here because it, to me, is somewhat political. It's from Sheila Butt. She posted it. She met with the women at, I believe, Wiley several Saturdays ago. And she has written very, very good, I think, about choosing right and wrong and not political parties. That's back there. If you want it, that's fine. It's not part of my presentation at all. Thank you very much.